Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to all of you to another edition of Express Explained, our special event for our very special readers. Some of you who might have attended earlier editions of Explained would know that the event is an extension of the Express's explanatory journalism, what we sometimes have started calling journalism of knowledge, which is an effort at going beyond and deeper than just the news, which is immediately obvious. To explore through investigation, research, and analysis the many layers of complexities that are embedded in any event, policy, or decision. Today's event is on a subject that is top of the mind at most times, and it is particularly so at the moment: the challenge of jobs. To unpack the nature of the challenge and place it in context, and perhaps suggest some ways forward, we have with us today Manish Sabharwal, chairman of TeamLease, an expert who has closely studied a range of issues around jobs and job creation in India. He is also an Indian Express columnist. Mr. Sabharwal, welcome. It is our privilege and honor to have you here. Thank you for sparing the time for our leaders. Speaking with Mr. Sabharwal will be my colleague Harish Damodaran, Rural Affairs Editor at the Indian Express. Harish has been a journalist for over a quarter century and has written extensively on multiple aspects of the macroeconomy. Harish will open the discussion with a short presentation. This will be followed by an explanatory discussion with Mr. Sabharwal, after which the floor will be open to any of you who might have any questions for Mr. Sabharwal. One last request: phones on silent please, and try not to move around because these cameras, we'll be on Facebook Live, so these cameras sometimes get disturbed. Welcome once again. Thank you very much, Mr. Sabharwal. Harish.
Okay, yeah. We are pleased to have with us Manish Sabharwal, chairman of TeamLease, which is a people supply chain company, and which is in the business of providing staffing and HR services to firms in various sectors. It's a 3,000 crore plus revenue, and it's a company, and it's a listed company, and TeamLease has something like 2,000 clients and has so far placed around 17 lakh, I'm told, whatever, 1.7 million people on work, mostly on a temporary staffing model, right, across a range of sectors from retail, FMCG, manufacturing, auto, IT, agri, telecom, banking services, etc. So, I mean, I can't think of anybody better to analyze the current job situation in India. And before we start, I thought we'll run past a few slides, and just to provide a background and context for our conversation. Yeah, I think the Modi government had a good start. In the first 2 years, the growth was quite high, and there was a clear acceleration from the last 2 years of the UPA. So you had a growth of something like 8.1% in 2015, but then it fell. It fell somewhat quite sharply actually, especially in last year. But last couple of quarters there has been some recovery, because of the effects of demonetization and GST more or less dissipating. So if you look at it on a quarter-to-quarter basis, you can see how it fell. I think it's the maximum fall was in the April-June quarter. Subsequently, it has been reviving marginally. And I think this quarter they are expecting around 7%, but it's still below whatever the 8% levels in 2015-16. And also there are some signs of investment revival. I mean, based on the gross fixed capital formation growth. I think the current quarter is expected at something like 9.9%. The growth in gross fixed capital formation, and your capital goods production too is up. I think in the last October-December quarter it was up about 11%. And there are a couple of good greenfield projects. I thought this Kia Motors is quite a major project, and they say that they'll take off. I mean, they'll produce their first car in March 2019. And the second one also, I think, is a very positive development. The the Macquarie Group, bidding to win a toll operate transfer right to manage about some 700 kilometers of national highway stretches, and there are plans to totally auction out similarly around something like totally 75 stretches, and they say that they'll be able to mop up about 80,000 crore, and which can be deployed into fresh projects. Okay, but there are challenges also, new risks which are coming. The first is of course oil. I think our current account deficit fell to around 15 billion in 2016-17. This year probably it's going to rise to around 50 billion, 45 to 50 billion, and your oil import bill also had fallen heavily. So both, on the current account deficit and even the fiscal front, the low oil prices allowed the government to raise excise duties on petrol and diesel, and you were able to mobilize around 1,60,000 crore a year. And the second, I think, is probably the interest rates. They are starting to rise. The bond yields have gone up, and even I think last week, I think SBI, PNB, ICICI, and all started raising their base lending rate. And you are also having a global monetary tightening. It's back to so the ultra low negative interest rates is over. Even US 10-year bond yields today are close to 3%. So and you had and this can affect capital flows into countries like India. And I think since February, foreign portfolio investors have been sellers in the Indian stock and debt market. Then of course the NPA problem. We thought that with the December the recapitalization program, and plus also some of these resolutions happening under the insolvency and bankruptcy code. And we thought that it was getting slowly resolved. But now after PNB Modi, of course it's not it's of course Nirav Modi. So since then there's been again the thing. And same thing, I think probably now we are back to some kind of political uncertainty. See, there are many things which we took for granted in the last 3 years. We said that oil won't cross $50, $60. The moment it crosses, the US shale producers will start producing oil. The second is we took low global interest rates for granted, and also we thought that Modi is in for till 2029. Well, he may be, but we are less sure about it. So we are back to a little bit of an uncertainties have come back. Now, this is the main topic, the conversation which we are going to have. We know that what happened during 2004-5 and 2011-12, it was a period of very high growth. I think one of the good things which happened was the first time I think India's workforce engaged in agriculture fell. This is the first time ever in India's 2,000 year history, 3,000 year history. And but the challenge is precisely about there are about 12 million new job market entrants. The total, of course, there are many people who are also retiring and exiting. So the net addition may be about 7 to 7.5 million. But basically these 12 million new entrants have to be a given job, and obviously we need to create non-farm jobs, and ideally remunerative, and it should be formal sector. And this last figure I think is a problem, right? We are saying 30 million people in the organized sector, whereas I think there are about 50 million EPFO holders and about I think 25 million I think GPF accounts. So there is a problem. I think Mr. Sabharwal and other people think that actually the size of our formal employment is much higher than whatever. I think they say that it's closer to around 20-22%, whereas I think if you go by the Labor Ministry data, it's about 6 to 7%. And this is something which I want to raise. Our first middle class was created in government employment. My father, maybe many of we are all, I think, many of our children of government servants. Okay, but that fell. Something like 2 million jobs were lost in government between 1998 and now. But then on the other hand, you had IT sector, and most of the jobs were created after 2000. But now there are a lot of questions being asked about whether because of the visa regimes and all, whether this 3.9 million, whether it is more or less stagnated. So where are the next aspirational jobs going to come from? Apart from chai and pakoda, whether and probably is some kind of a digital platform-based entrepreneurship the model. Like they talk about something like about 7 lakh Uber, Ola cabs. Is this the road ahead? then I want to end with two slides, which I think is very important. If you look at the China slide, their working age population rose, and precisely during this time they had the manufacturing revolution, and then it slides, whereas ours will continue to rise, till it's going to go to about 1.1 billion. So how are we going to generate jobs for them? Is it going to be manufacturing? Is it going to be services? And that is the thing. And I thought I'll end with this particular slide. If you see the average age, I mean, I think by 2015 the average age in China will be maybe a couple of years older than me. And we are still around 27, 28. So we are very young. I mean, the demographics are very favorable for us, but young men and women can also be angry men and women, right? So how do we sort out this thing? So I think Manish, we can start. So how do you analyze the job market right now?
See, I think you have to make up your mind whether India's official unemployment rate is a fudge. India's official unemployment rate is 4.9%. I don't believe it's a fudge. I believe everybody who wants a job has a job, but they don't have the wages they want or they need. I think that distinction is very important, because if you think we have a jobs problem, you throw money from helicopters, you mandate a 3-day work week, you take away people's shovels and give them spoons, right? You're saying the problem is bhuka nanga pyasa, so let's not, when the building is on fire, you don't talk about the building safety code, you put out the fire. So if you think India has a jobs problem, you should bust the fisc and you should spend 2 lakh crores, doing a direct benefit transfer or an NREGS equivalent. I think that misdiagnosis in India has been very expensive for India, and I think we have a wages problem. If you believe the problem is wages, how do you raise wages? Wages is about productivity, right? I mean, I landed in August 94 in the US for my MBA. By September, I was asking myself, these Americans are smarter than us, why are they richer than us? I mean, clearly I can kick their butt individually, right? But why does Joe Sixpack, who drinks beer and watches college football all day, make $50,000 a year? And why does Ram Bharose make 50,000 rupees a year? And the productivity is embedded in the air. It is in the institutions, it is in the infrastructure, it is in the human capital. So if you believe India has a wages problem, I think that you need to go down the path of formalization, urbanization, industrialization, financialization, and human capital. I think that solving a jobs problem, that train has left the station. When I started TeamLease 17 years ago, we do hundreds of job fairs. 75% of the kids who came to our job fairs would say, "Kahin bhi naukri de do, kisi bhi company mein de do, kisi bhi de." Now 75% of the kids who show up to our job fairs say, 5,000 की नौकरी तो लूले लंगड़े को मिल जाएगी. हम यहाँ 10,000, 15,000 की नौकरी के लिए आए हैं. So I think those are two different problems. I'm not undermining the fact that but I would submit we have a formal jobs problem, not a jobs problem. And it's very important to recognize the difference between those two, because you can solve the jobs problem by busting the fisc or just keeping people occupied. And India has moved beyond that, and that train has left the station.
When do you think this happened? Like you're saying that
sometime over the last 10 years. It's hard to sort of date it, but the notion, I think my case always has been all of us walk around with this stupid notion in our head that India is 90% informally employed. India is 75% informally employed, because if you add Provident Fund, ESI, NPS, GPF, and government employment, you end up somewhere between 100 and 125 million people. That is 20 to 25% of our labor force is now formally employed. In fact, 60% of our non-farm labor force is now formally employed. Now, and I think you should be very careful with survey data, because our official household survey data, 29% of Indians say they work for an enterprise with more than 9 employees. And official enterprise survey data, only 1.5% of enterprises say they have more than 9 employees. So this is not a reconciliation problem, this is an existential sort of jhoot. Both dono jhoot bol rahe hain, because employers like to say they have more employees and employees like to say they work for a bigger company. So I think while we try and fix our survey data, let's have some faith in administrative data. Provident fund payments, nobody makes every month cash payments unless they have to. ESI, nobody makes it. Government employment is clear. So I would say sometime over the last 5-10 years, India's sort of services employment started delivering.
Okay, so it's basically the services things which has solved India's jobs.
The fastest growing segment of India's job market is sales, customer service, and logistics. That's where all the jobs at the bottom of the pyramid are being created. They're domestic consumption jobs. It's sales, customer. China's farm to non-farm happened to factories. India's is happening not to services, to sales. It's a sales job.
Okay, so your central proposition is India is not suffering a jobs crisis, but it is suffering a wages crisis.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? And so what would you say is the equilibrium, whatever, reservation wage, you know, that is below which people are not willing to work today? Like what? I mean,
well, there are three divergences in wages, right? So one is the divergence between real wages and nominal wages. So I had a kid in a job fair in Gwalior tell me, give me 4,000 rupees in Gwalior, 6,000 rupees in Gurgaon, 9,000 rupees in Delhi, and 18,000 rupees in Bombay. My bags are packed, tell me where you want me to go. I said, why do you need 4 times the money to go to Bombay? He said, जितने बच्चे 10,000 में बॉम्बे गए थे सब वापस आ गए, खाना रहना और ऑफिस जाना अब नहीं बनता 10,000 में. I said, but तुम तो साला second class fail है, तुमको 18,000 कौन देगा? He says, अरे मैं graduate से खाना कम थोड़ी खाता हूँ. Right? So he wasn't asking for a salary, he was asking for a reimbursement. Obviously smart kid, we hired him on the spot. But that divergence between real wages and nominal wages is happening because of India's urbanization. India only has 52 cities with more than 1 million people. China has 375 cities with more than 1 million people. We have 6 lakh villages. 2 lakh of our villages have less than 200 people. So are you going to take jobs to people or people to jobs? In political imagination, you're always taking jobs to people. But in reality, it's about taking people to jobs. You know, Chinese New Year is a 4-day weekend in February where 220 million people buy a train ticket to go home for Chinese New Year. We don't have that on Chhath, Diwali, Eid or Christmas. The only place where I have started seeing that now is Kerala, because Kerala is now 9.5% Bihari. They send 10% to the Middle East. So they
Bengalis, I think.
Well, Bihar, now it's now 10. So they sent 10% to the Middle East, so they brought 9.5% from Bihar. But now on Chhath, 1/10 of the population of Kerala pretty much disappears, which is a uniquely sort of Bihari festival. So I think you will have to take jobs to people, people to jobs rather than jobs to people in the short run. I think this is also an important existential question because Karnataka, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Tamil Nadu and Andhra, the undivided Andhra, will only be 5% of population growth in the next 20 years.
So these jobs will come here and people will travel from Bihar?
Yeah, UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Jharkhand and Odisha will be 50% of India's population growth in the next 20 years. So we'll end up with the Chinese New Year anyway.
The jobs will be generated in Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, in these places, whereas the job seekers will come from there.
I think job creation tends to cluster. I think it's hard to predict, but there is a self-fulfilling prophecy of job creation. I mean, Bangalore, where I live, is the only place in the world where you can hire 1,000 Hadoop programmers in 1 week. Right? So there is a clustering which happens for job creation. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I mean, why did Bangalore become Bangalore? It's a very interesting question, right? Is it because it was the first electrified city of India? Is it because there was a German called Grumble who planted trees there? Is it because Viseswaraya did a lot of educational institutions? Is it because the Maharaja of Mysore made a venture capital investment in Walchand Aerospace, which became HAL and created a defense cluster? Some people say it's because Texas Instruments chose to set up in Bangalore, right? Which was in 1987, they set up a satellite center there. So I tracked the person from Texas Instruments and I said, why did you choose Bangalore? She said, oh, well, my final list was Hyderabad, Chennai and Bangalore, and I had a cousin in Bangalore. So you know, there are lots of econometric explanations for these things, but why did Silicon Valley become Silicon Valley? Nobody can explain it. And Boston Route 128 or Texas and Austin has not been able to replicate it, although they might be better places to live. So I would say job clusters, Chandigarh is an economic wasteland. It's a very nice city. It has broad roads. It's an economic wasteland. But infrastructure chaos of Gurgaon, infrastructure chaos of Magarpatta outside Pune, infrastructure chaos of Bangalore, and Hyderabad, Gachibowli, are job magnets. So a lot of people walk around, infrastructure will create job magnets. In India, if you have infrastructure, then you're an economic wasteland, right? Lutyens, Delhi, and Chandigarh.
Yeah, for every Bangalore, you also have the Morbis and the Tirupurs, and probably with hardly much infrastructure. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So are we going to shove more people into Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, or are we going to create 200 cities? See, the 9th ring road in Beijing is 900 kilometers in circumference. So 125 kilometers. But 1/3 of Japan lives in and around Tokyo. There are 36 million people in Tokyo. So 1/3 of Japan lives around Tokyo. So there is one model of the mega city, and there is one model of China, which says that we'll have 375 cities.
So the Japanese model is basically based on bullet trains. You get in people from outside, they come, they come, and they're able to come fast. Whereas you are saying
Japan also, because of its aging, right? The sale of adult diapers in Japan now cost baby diapers, right? I mean, there are more pets in Japan than babies. So that's a unique sort of situation in Japan. But I would say jobs to people, people to jobs, mega cities versus distributed is the defining debate for India. And that's why 29 chief ministers matter more than one prime minister for job creation. But actually 100 mayors matter more than 29 chief ministers. But we don't have mayors in India, right?
But how did, I think you were mentioning about China. They have around something like 375 cities, right? With 1 million plus population, whereas India has there's something like 52 cities. How have the Chinese...
It's decentralization. See, if you look at our Constituent Assembly debates, we had strong states, and then after partition, they become strong center. In Indira Gandhi, in 15 of her speeches, she said strong states lead to a weak nation. I think the decentralized... India can't be run from Delhi, and we tried to, right? I don't think India can be run from state capitals either. We don't have mayors. But in 1924, Jawaharlal Nehru was the mayor of Allahabad, Vallabhbhai Patel was the mayor of Ahmedabad, Chittaranjan Das was the mayor of Chittaranjan Das was the mayor of Calcutta, and Rajendra Prasad mayor of Patna. And I have 6 letters of Jawaharlal Nehru talking about street lights, 4 letters of Vallabhbhai Patel talking about school teachers being absent. So job markets are local. There may be some such thing as India's capital market, but there's no such thing as India's land and labor market. Export labor markets like Bihar are completely different dynamics than import labor markets like Karnataka. So I think decentralization, maybe using 254(2) of the Constitution more and more and more and more, which allows states to amend central laws, right? So our primary understanding of the Constitution till now has been 254(1), which says that if state laws and central laws conflict, the central law always wins. But we always had 254(2). It said that if Delhi agrees with what a state legislature amends a central law, you don't have to go to the Lok Sabha, you can just get the president to sign it. And so I think China's genius wasn't some Ayatollah in Beijing issuing fatwas, it was mayors competing for investment, 300 of them.
So on the one hand, you have said that one thing about India is it's not a jobs crisis, it's a wage crisis. So therefore we know what the new job entrants want.
Yes.
What is happening on the other side? Employers. What is the kind of wage that they are willing to pay? Is it that they are not reconciled to the new reality? What is
no. I think one of the parts of reforms, one of the parts in India which we have always neglected is thinking about formalization of the demand side. So India has 63 million enterprises. 12 million of them don't have an office. 12 million of them work from home. Before GST, only 7 million used to pay any indirect taxes. Only 1.2 million actually pay Provident Fund and ESI. Only 1 million of them are actually companies. Most tragically, there are only 18,500 companies in India with a paid up capital of more than 10 crores. Now you have to think of that. 6.3 crore enterprises only translates to 18,500 companies with a paid up capital of $1.5 million. It absolutely makes no sense. This is an economy which is primitive by all standards. And this level of informalization is unacceptable from a sense of humor about the rule of law, right? We Indians have a sense of humor about the rule of law because there are transmission losses between how the law is written, interpreted, practiced, and enforced, right? I mean, if an Indian follows a rule, she feels like she missed a deal, right? I mean, if you follow a rule, then you should have called somebody, you should have... So one is the sense of humor. But from my perspective, 63 million enterprises just don't have the productivity to pay the wage premium. See, my view of the world is an employer is only an employer who can pay the wage premium. It's sort of like LIBOR, right? In our region, you have to pay the extra wage because you can only be my client because my average salary is 25,000 rupees a month for my 1,70,000 employees. So if you're not willing to pay 25,000 rupees a month, you can't be a client of mine. And so if you think of my own experience as an entrepreneur, there are two kinds of companies you can create, a baby and a dwarf. Baby and a dwarf are both small, but the baby is going to grow and the dwarf is going to stay there. My first company was a 50 crore company in 10 years. My second company is a 4,000 crore company in 10 years. And so one was a dwarf and one was a baby. The difference between a baby and a dwarf is not more food. It's not more money. It is really in DNA and software. It's really in software. And corporate India, 63 million enterprises are largely dwarfs. They're not babies. They're born small and they stay small. I don't think there's anything cultural. I get very irritated with cultural explanations for India's informality. It was just an Indian state was not willing to enforce its will. I think that you should, if you can't comply with 100% of India's labor laws without violating 10% of them, which is true for India, then how are you going to enforce your labor laws? People are not going to comply with laws unless they are enforced pervasively, permanently, and equally. So to my mind, this formalization was a huge miss, either post-independence in the 60s or in 1991, I don't know. But I think that if you formalize corporate India, the number of enterprises may come down. We don't need 63 million enterprises. The US economy is 8 times our size. It only has 22 million enterprises. So adding millions of enterprises doesn't really give the wage premium or create jobs. So I think, yes, we should have a number of enterprises decline, which I think is happening with GST and demonetization and everything else. And the ones who will be left will be the ones who will be forced to pay the wage premium, or they will not be able to stop themselves.
So you are saying that there are about 18,000 enterprises today which can pay a wage premium.
No, I think there are about 200,000 enterprises. There are 18,000 with a paid up capital of this.
Yes, above this thing. So something like around 200,000. You're saying that can afford to pay can have formal people on their rolls.
Well, there are 1.2 million who pay Provident Fund and ESI.
Right, but that may include even government and all.
No.
These
are all private enterprises. So there are 1.2 million already. I think there should be 5 to 10 million enterprises who pay Provident Fund and ESI if the law was enforced. So Provident Fund and ESI are pretty crappy programs. Provident Fund is the world's most expensive government securities mutual fund. ESI is India's worst health insurance program because it only has a claims ratio of 45%. There's no health insurance program in India which has a claims ratio of less than 95%. So despite PF and ESI not having clients but hostages, you have 1.2 million enterprises. If PF and ESI got their act together, I think you would have 5 to 7 million people paying Provident Fund and enterprises paying PF and ESI. And so you've had a 20 million increase in Provident Fund payers in the last 2.5 years. These are not new jobs, but they're new formal jobs for sure. So to me, that's kind of interesting when people say, oh, these are not new jobs. Well, India doesn't have a jobs problem, we have a formal jobs problem, and they're new formal jobs for sure.
So you are saying that in the last 2 years, the
formalization of India has
happened even in jobs.
Yes.
So we are saying that these people who are now, they are getting paid better than what they were being paid 2 years back, with all these benefits. And,
absolutely.
Okay. So we have created a new formal workforce, an additional formal workforce.
I mean,
which is probably
people use informal and small interchangeably. Informal is illegal, small is fine. I think if people believe they can be small and productive, I'm okay with that. I don't believe you can be small, very small and productive. I think 50% of India being self-employed is a problem. That's not self-employment, it's self-exploitation. You know, there was an idiot Russian economist called Chayanov in the 1920s. He convinced Nehru that small farms are viable because you don't have to pay your wife a salary, your kids a salary, or yourself a salary. And he called it self-exploitation, actually. Many Kirana stores in India are self-exploitation. You know, so the question really is how do we? I don't think we should have 50% self-employment, and I don't think we should have only 20% of our labor force on decent wage employment.
I think one of the initiatives of the Modi government has been this whole idea of fixed term employment, right?
Yes.
And they started off with garments and I think footwear, where you pay people, where you give them fixed term contracts. I mean, for this period, and this particular period, they will be entitled for all the
benefits, right?
everything which a regular, the permanent workforce gets, right? I mean, how successful has this been, according to you?
Well, I mean, it's just a recognition that what doesn't matter is permanent or temporary jobs. It matters whether they're formal or informal jobs. See, I would submit employment has changed all over the world from being a lifetime contract to a taxi cab relationship. And it's changed for various reasons. The average life expectancy of a Fortune 500 company when the first list came out in 1955 was 60 years. The average life expectancy of a Fortune 500 company in the last list is only 14 years. So companies are not permanent enterprises. The companies live much less. These are projects, they come together. So the notion that benefits should be linked to employers because employers will last forever may be a train which has left the station. So fixed term employment just recognizes that what matters is minimum wages. What matters is benefits. What matters is leave. What matters is safety of working conditions. So there should be some non-negotiables in labor laws. I absolutely accept that. But the notion that we should have, 17 definitions of workers, 22 definitions of wages, the notions that we should have, almost 200 crore sheets of paper in labor law compliance every year used by corporate India makes no sense. So fixed term employment is essentially a recognition that the world of employment is changing. But what we need to ensure for people is formal employment. And formality should be defined by minimum wages, leave, safety, and benefits.
What does one do with, this is of course my favorite subject also, what does one do with farmers? Like I think you were mentioning about self-exploitation. I think an average farmer today is aware that the minimum support price he's getting is not covering his labor cost. It's not covering his family labor, right? I mean, there is no this thing. What is going to happen in a sector like farming? I think we have something like 120 million farming households. What is going to happen to these kind of sectors? Will they also get whatever formalized? Will they get? What is going to happen? Because
we can't support 50% of our labor force in farming. So the only way to help farmers is to have less of them, right? We have to move people. The farm to non-farm transition is the definition of development in my mind, and that has been one of sort of India's biggest failures. 50% of our labor force only produces 13% of our GDP. That is why these people are poor, right? Because you're not producing enough GDP. If you think of IT in India, IT is only 0.7% of India's labor force. It's a rounding error in our labor force, but it produces 9% of our GDP. So you have a high productivity oasis in technology where 0.7% of labor force produces 9% of GDP, and you have 50% of the labor force producing 12%. Yeah, exactly. Yes. So it's a productivity question. That's what I keep telling you. You say when you say farmers are employed, they are not employed. They are hanging out. So we have to move people from farm to non-farm. Now the question really is can all traditional economies of our size and scale have moved the farm to non-farm to factories?
Yes.
That is what China did, right? Yeah. So the peak of any country's labor force in manufacturing was Britain in World War II, which was 45% of the labor force. America peaked at about 33%, China peaked at about 28%.
This is in manufacturing.
In manufacturing of the labor force, 45, 33, and 28. India is only at 12%, which is where
33% is US?
peak, but now down to 12.
Yes. Okay.
China peaked at 28, now down to 24. Okay. India is at 12% of our labor force. Now, of course, manufacturing has changed, and I know a lot of people sort of advising India to give up on manufacturing. But I think 12% is the wrong number. I think Make in India might be Make for India. If you look at the $60 billion in FDI last year, it is clustered in manufacturing, but in areas where domestic consumption is getting to critical mass. In cars, in FMCG, in FMCD. See, Deng Xiaoping in 1978 was very skilled when he began China's opening, but he was also very lucky. He got a 30-year super cycle of global trade, global growth, and global openness to sort of trade and deconstruction of manufacturing supply chains. That's not the hand India has been dealt in 2017 or even in 2010.
That's why I showed that graph.
Yes.
Where the labor force in China, I mean the working age population went up, rose, and precisely during this time, as you were saying, there was a deconstruction of manufacturing, and they benefited from that kind of thing. So where will India stand? Is it going to be manufacturing, are you saying?
I think we can go from 12 to 18% or 20%. I think we can get there. I think 12% is wrong. I think 1 out of 10 of our labor force in manufacturing. Will we be 4 out of 10 or 5 out of 10 like England was? No. Will we be 3 out of 10 like America was? No. Or China was? But I think we can get to 1.5 or 2 out of 10 of our labor force manufacturing. And that itself is another 50 to 100 million jobs, right?
So 20% is a reasonable...
I mean, these are all guesses. These are all models. Every model is incomplete. Some models are useful. But yeah, I would say we should target we could get to 15 to 20% of our labor force if we reduced regulatory cholesterol, if we fixed our infrastructure, and we raised our human capital.
And what about the IT? What is happening, IT sector? Do you think it has now stagnated?
No. India employs about 3.5 million people in IT. I'm willing to bet you dinner in the most expensive restaurant in Delhi that it will be 7 million 5 years from now. I think IT employment will be 7 million 5 years.
So all these things about visa and whatever, competition from Romania.
I mean, India has we have 350,000 people on an H-1B visa, and we have 3.5 million people here. So about 10% of India's IT labor force is on an H-1B visa. If Trump decides to reduce that amount, then it will accelerate offshoring. There are 650 captives now in India, which are companies, Mercedes-Benz India, Robert Bosch India. These are all companies who are running their only software development centers. So I know all of us think that people work in Infosys or Accenture or IBM, but technology is no longer something you can outsource when the Internet of Things becomes a reality, right? So John Deere wants to have GPSs. I mean, there are 600 companies who are setting up their captive. The fastest growing segment of employment in India's IT sector is captive centers.
Captive centers belonging to MNC
parents who are no longer outsourcing IT, and they're just getting off a plane and saying, I'll have 300 my developers doing for myself.
But that seems to be a problem now. See, like we have the story of this Harley Davidson now. Now Harley Davidson, I think, has 2 plants in India, right?
Yes.
And so 50% import duty or 75% import duty is fine. I mean,
no, these captive centers are software centers.
Pardon?
I'm talking about software centers.
Okay, but won't there be similar pressure on the software? I mean, say for the US headquartered company to relocate back to the US. I mean, isn't that going to happen with Trump?
I don't think you can. India may be criticized for its massive expansion of engineering, right? We produce 1.5 million engineers a year. That's more than China and the US combined, right? 15 lakh engineers.
15 lakh is
so 15 lakh engineers a year.
Yeah.
So China produces about 1 million, America produces about 100,000. I think, you can criticize engineering for what it is, but it has created a people supply chain which is unreplicable. So the manufacturing switching costs, which now we see in China, it's becoming hard to move manufacturing out of China because of supply chains being set, because so there are massive switching costs, even though costs in China have gone up for manufacturing coming out. I think India has those same switching costs in IT. Because of alumni, because of technology, because of our engineering supply chain, because of our coaching supply chain. There are many elements of India's IT ecosystem which has been built over the last 25 years, which are really hard to replicate. So I would say that if a country, that's, as I said, Bangalore's the only place in the world where you can get off a plane and hire 1,000 Hadoop programmers. That is not replicable anywhere else in the world. Or Hyderabad or Chennai, maybe. You could do that, you could get. So I would submit that, yes, there is a challenge in IT, but we are going from 3.5 million to 7 million people employed in IT over the next 5 years.
One thing which I get to see as an agriculture reporter, when I go to places like, say, Hathras, Mathura, in the evening, I see a lot of young boys running. Most of them are rural youth.
Yes.
And they clearly want to join the army. Okay? And the craze for government jobs, like we know what happened to this SSC exam, right? I mean, something like, I'm told about some 14 lakh people wrote it in the tier 1 for just 8,000, whatever, class 2 grade jobs. Why is this still happening? Is this again linked to the same thing, the reservation wage? I mean, is that
the government pays a wage premium at the bottom of the pyramid. It pays too much at the bottom and it pays too little at the higher parts of the government. So when you hear all these stories of 3.5 million people applied for 4 million jobs in Uttarakhand, 90% of the people who applied already have a job. Now that the interview has been abolished for government jobs at the peon and bottom of the pyramid, it's a lottery ticket khareedna hai. So if you get the job, you'll go. 35,000 rupees for a driver is what you get paid in the central government. I think that's a decent wage premium. So, and no accountability and job security. So it's sort of a nice deal. I think the government pays too much at the bottom of the pyramid. It pays too little at the higher end of the pyramid. So
it's just that
it's a wage premium. Start looking at everything in the labor market through a wage premium lens. You will be able to explain behavior at a micro, macro, firm level. Wage premiums come from productivity of enterprises. If you rank manufacturing companies by size at the 90th percentile and 10th percentile, there's a 24 times difference in productivity. If there's a 24 times difference in productivity, you'll never pay the wage premium. But if you never pay the wage premium, you'll never be productive. So you're stuck in this low-level equilibrium in India, which we needed to shock ourselves out of. Which is why I believe that demonetization, RERA, GST, gold imports being down 20%, financial assets being up 50%, it's all related. Social scientists call it cascading regime change. At some point, you start reinforcing each other these reforms. Economies aren't machines, they are complex adaptive systems. And we're starting to see now where the costs of informality may outweigh the costs of formality. See, till now you've always, in Bihar, I remember going there last year and used to say कि बिहार की बदकिस्मती है कि ईमानदार को बेवकूफ माना गया.
Can you just repeat this again? The cost of informality
is now more than the cost of formality, right? A kid, in the past you would hire a kid and you would say, chitti nahi dunga, I'll pay you 8,000. And he would say, fine. But now he says, I want a damn credit card. I want a loan. If you don't give me an appointment letter, how am I going to open my bank account? How am I going to get my loan? So the costs of formality, which in the past were perceived as there are huge costs of formality, right? As I mentioned, one is the difference between real wages and nominal wages. India's labor laws are actually among the worst in the world, right? There is a 40% difference between gross wages and net wages, right? There's 24% PF, there's 8% ESI, there's 4.5% EDLI. So every time I give somebody an offer letter in a job fair of 20,000 rupees, he says, haath wali salary or chitti wali salary, right? So there is not only real wages and nominal wages, there is gross versus net wages. But in the past, people would say, nahi, oh, chitti mat do, just give me let's settle for half the difference. But now kids want an appointment letter. So because the benefits of being in formal employment, either for the corridor effect or for the signaling value or for the credit access, I mean, there's just so many upsides that I can give you for formality. Most people, I know this budget drowned out that one number which was there in the economic survey that pre-GST there were 7 million registered enterprises and now they're 10.5 million. So there was a 50% increase in the number of enterprises. Now these 3.5 million enterprises have not yet experienced the magic of access to talent, access to formal customers, and access to credit.
But for these extra 3.5 million new enterprises, whatever, which have been created, there would have been millions which have been destroyed, right? I mean, because of, I suppose...
But they don't employ many people. But they don't employ very many people. See, one of the most incorrigible to my mind, and I have a dog in this fight on demonetization, right? I'm on the RBI board. But, to say that demonetization destroyed the informal sector, I mean, it makes no sense to me. There is not that much employment in the 63 million enterprises.
Employment will be there, right? I mean, if I am running a shop, I'll have a Chotu, I'll have a...
And Raju and Chotu is a job?
No, but
it's a 2,000 rupees. I don't think you need Raju. That's why you're not finding Raju and Chotu. One of the downsides of running TeamLease is every week an Indian CEO calls me and said, "Yaar, ghar ke liye maid dila do, driver dila do." We don't do those jobs. But the biggest barometer of India's formalization is household help is becoming an extinct, if not rare, commodity. In big cities, you will get the same wages with working in the formal sector in F&B rather than staying at home. And so either you pay 25,000 rupees like a butler or you wash your own clothes. And I think that's great. So I would say be careful when you extrapolate India's informal sector as the only option between penury. That's not true anymore. That was probably true 15, 20 years ago. It may not be true in all parts of India, but I would submit that once you reach the tipping point of 100, 120 million formal employment out of a total of 250 million non-farm employment, you're starting to get to critical mass of formal employment. So our problem is farm employment.
Yes.
Our problem is farm employment, absolutely. So there are 5 labor market transitions: farm to non-farm, rural to urban, subsistence self-employment to decent wage employment, informal enterprises to formal enterprises, and school to work. School to work is a very important and difficult transition, right? 265 lakh kids take the class 10th exam every year, 105 lakh fail. 160 lakh kids take the class 12th exam every year, 80 lakh fail. 80 lakh pass class 12, 50 lakh go to college, 30 lakh disappear, and I'm not even talking about the kids who leave before class 8, which is a huge number, right? So there is a huge challenge in our school system. We have a huge challenge in our skill system. We still teach automobile engineering with a carburetor. No Indian car is made with a carburetor. I can give you thousands of examples of the mismatch. But the college question is also important. You're talking about jobs, but the world has, and this is not only an Indian problem, the world has produced more graduates in the last 35 years than the 800 years before that. So what does that mean? 60% of taxi drivers in Korea now have a college degree. 31% of retail checkout clerks in the US now have a college degree. 15% of high-end security guards in India now have a college degree.
15% of
high-end security guards, kind of security guards have a college degree now. Yes. But don't patronize, because social signaling value of college matters. Vocational training is usually for other people's children, it's not for our children. And it's quite rational. Michael Spence got his Nobel Prize for the social signaling value of college, right? Yeah. I went to Wharton, my wife went to Harvard. These are good places to be at, but better places to be from. Right? The fundamental value is being from IIT, not being at IIT or IIM or something like that, right? So I think we have to strike that balance between sort of recognizing that college isn't what it used to be, but college tends to matter. But the supply side constraints, or the massive supply side response which India had in education, in schools and in colleges, has been an important part of now the demand side becoming a binding constraint. We often believe our supply side is a binding constraint, but I think our informality on the demand side was a bigger binding constraint. And if we don't enforce our laws, if we don't increase the consequences of informality, then you punish people. I pay 3% of the ESI of this country. I pay 100 crores of statutory dues every month to the government. There are thousands of people who don't do that. Why should you punish me for paying 100 crores of Provident Fund, ESI and EDLI every month? So I would submit it's very important to think holistically about supply and demand. Yes, our schools have a problem, and our Right to Education Act confuses school buildings with building schools. Those are two different things. We need to convert that to the Right to Learning Act. But supply may not be the binding constraint for Indian prosperity. It may also be the demand side. We have too many entrepreneurs who are not formal, who are not productive, who don't pay minimum wages, and we need more enterprises which do.
But at the end of the day, it is these small enterprises, whether we like it or not, who are creating jobs.
I don't have a problem with small. I have a problem with informal.
No, but now with the compliance costs for them going up, isn't that going to be a
I don't think they're in. I don't think they're informal.
I would ideally like, okay, let there be only whatever companies employing 100 workers.
No.
Let it be like that. But what do I do in the in between? See, we have killed so many informal jobs. Okay? But at the same time,
so why hasn't our unemployment rate gone up?
Unemployment rate, as you said, it's a little complex. I mean, whether it is 4%, 5%.
No, so you believe it's a fudge?
I'm not saying it's a fudge. I mean,
yeah, you do. You said we have so much unemployment, and our unemployment rate of 5% is not capturing that. See, you have to be careful with a country like India, where the numbers are hard, right? But I don't believe our unemployment rate is 20-30%. If people do, I'm happy to understand why they believe it's 20-30%. I say if you want a job at 5,000 rupees, I think anybody can get a job at 5,000 rupees in India. Even in Unnao or Durgapur, not Bangalore or Rajasthan. But where can you get a job of 10,000 rupees? Where can you get a job of 15,000 rupees? And a 15,000 rupee job in Bombay is equal to 4,000 rupees in Gwalior. Right? The guy's not asking me for salary, he's asking for a reimbursement. Right? He's saying, give me cost of living. So I would say real versus nominal wages, gross versus net wages, government versus private wages. There are 3 or 4 fault lines in wages that we have. But be careful when you say that millions of informal people are on the road and they don't have any income and any money. It's not clear to me. That's true.
I think it's the owners who have lost out. I mean, the people who were like...
who are violating labor laws and tax laws in India.
Well, I don't know whether, like definitely the shopkeeper, the power loom owner, the small scale industrialist, the small fabricator, these people have lost, and they were probably employing these people.
So workers are winning over the capitalists, is it?
Small capital. I mean, if at all you call them capitalists.
I don't know. I think India has a complex dance between small enterprises and informality. I have no problem. You're getting me wrong. I'm not saying India's only going to be big companies. I think 50 to 500 is the sweet spot for many economies. But please do not compare India's MSME sector to Germany's Mittelstand. The average size of a Mittelstand, which we talk about as Germany's sort of middle small companies, is $50 million. So we have to be clear that India, if we want India's small entrepreneurs to be viable, they're not going to be viable by hiring Raju and Chotu. They need to be viable by being productive and paying 10,000, 15,000 rupees a month. And I don't think there's anything cultural about Indians and informality. Anybody who uses the cultural explanation it's either the soft bigotry of low expectations or it is racism. Right? I mean, I can give you thousands of examples of cultural bigotry in the labor market.
So, Manish, we can open up
Please.
to questions. I mean, yes, sir. You start.
Introduce your name.
Yeah. Kindly introduce yourself.
Good evening, sir. My name is Sukhin, and my question for you is, the first one is that we're reading about a plethora of opportunities in Internet of Things and AI, which I think directly translates to more job for people in the technical sector who know about coding, etc. So what about the people in the non-technical sector, for example, someone from a commerce background or someone from humanities do to ride this wave of whatever revolution is coming? And secondly, for example, we talked about college. So everyone's going for the same degree and everyone's getting the same internships and everyone's doing the same thing. So how do we stand out in such a competitive market? Because the best part of India and the worst part of India is scale.
Yeah. See, I would be careful with using software and machine learning interchangeably. I've seen too many people do that. See, in software, you give data and you give rules and you get an answer. In machine learning, you give data and you give the answer and you get the rules. That's not about code writing. I think it's very important, Indians have started using machine learning and software interchangeably. Those are, actually machine learning offers a lot more opportunity for people who are non-technical people because the software is getting automated, there's a lot of resource out there. So when I said India's technology IT will go from 3.5 million to 7 million, it's not necessarily for software engineers. All companies are technology companies now. All operations is technology now. So I would be very careful with this technology pessimism that sort of seems to pervade newspapers. That I think that we are entering, we don't know exactly how to model it. But if a lot of this technology pessimism rhymes what people thought the Industrial Revolution would do to jobs in UK, so my sense is that I would believe that the technology revolution offers lots of opportunities to even commerce graduates or stuff like that. But I would submit soft skills. And nobody knows how to define soft skills and we don't even know how to teach it. It's in the air and let's not let nobody fool you that they can define soft skills and know how to teach it. But soft skills is where the wage premium is going to. Because learning versus knowing, Google knows everything, right? William Butler Yeats was a poet who used to say, education is not the filling of a bucket, it's the lighting of a fire. At least my education was the filling of a bucket, right? I did a CBSE board and it was the filling of a bucket. That is no longer valuable because Google knows everything, right? So I would submit that soft skills is the best way to stand out also. So even in schools when we say reading, writing, and arithmetic, the 3 R's, you actually have to add the 4th R of relationships to that. And maybe the school premium, I would submit in my world, the school wage premium is higher than the skilled wage premium and the graduate wage premium. Because at the bottom of the pyramid, what people are looking for is reading, writing, arithmetic, and soft skills. They're not really looking for your technical skills. So at the 25,000 rupee salary that I offer, it's really school skills which will help you stand out. But if you want to stand out, it's soft skills.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, the person behind.
Hi.
Can you speak into the room?
My question is, as you pointed out, that it is more related to crisis in farm employment. Crisis
Yes.
in farm, or employment in farm is self-exploitation or something similar.
Yes.
Do we see solution to that? Considering we are poor performance in farm productivity so far.
Yes. Raising farm productivity will lead to less farm employment, right? That's clear. That's not, that we can kid ourselves. The only way to help farmers is to have less farmers. Yes. But that doesn't lie in farming, it lies in non-farm job creation, right?
I think
you have to accelerate.
Yeah.
So Arthur Lewis was a Jamaican economist who got his Nobel Prize saying wages will only rise when you run out of farm labor. You call it the Louisiana turning point. China till now has crossed the Louisiana turning point. Foxconn just announced that they're going to set up a factory 3,000 kilometers inland and pay the same wages, which means they've run out of farm labor. India is far from the Louisiana turning point. We have another 100 million people or 200, which, yes, I think it has started, but it's not even close to what it should be. So I think accelerating non-farm employment will come from these 4 things. I can repeat them again: formalization, urbanization, industrialization, financialization, and human capital. And I would submit, I hope some of you see the connectivity between RERA, DST, demonetization, shell company evisceration. These are all connected and self-reinforcing to say we need to raise our formality, which will then raise productivity, which will then raise wages.
I think Manish put it very well. 50% of the population generates 13% of GDP, whereas in IT, 0.7% generates 9% of GDP. I think he put it very well.
I don't think that looks like RERA. RERA has done what? RERA has maybe helped consumers and users, but construction has gone down.
Yeah, I think we overpriced land too early in our development. I don't think Bangalore real estate should be equal to Chicago, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But question is,
so we are mispriced. If we misprice an asset as important as land so early in our development, we blunt entrepreneurship. The key skill for getting ahead in real estate is regulatory arbitrage. We have 3.5 million new enterprises post GST. 70 lakh enterprises used to pay excise and sales tax and every sort of VAT. Now we have more than 10.5 million. So, and that number will go to 12 or 13 million, because originally we thought GST would only formalize suppliers to big companies, but it was also formalizing buyers from big companies, because everybody is looking for income tax credit. So I would submit India is a $3-4 trillion economy already, if we could just measure it, with 2.5 trillion. And this productivity impact shows up in very funny ways. You know, this is, next month we will cross England's GDP. Should we celebrate that? I don't think so. I think it has taken us 71 years for 1.2 billion people to cross the GDP of 66 million people. There are only 66 million people in England. That's the same number as Kanpur.
So we'll be crossing Kanpur.
Yeah, so this is about productivity.
Yes, sir.
Sir, thank you so much. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Sir, thank you, sir. It was a very inspiring talk which you had given in the beginning. It was superb. So it's a bit of a long question. It's a personal request. I'll go a bit slow on my question. I am Wing Commander Vishu. I'm a retired Air Force officer. This is regarding my son. My son is done his B.Tech in computer science from the LMNIT Institute in Jaipur with a CGPA of 7.23. He finished this in 2016. After that, he wanted to venture into UPSC. So from 2016, he tried for UPSC and various banking sector jobs. He couldn't make the grade. Now he's going to be about 25 years in this October. So I've advised him to do some job rather than try for this and be at home. He has been doing all these things being at home. The question, sir, is your advice. He is 24 years and 6 months. Should he continue his efforts in this government job? Otherwise, should he take up a job in the IT sector and do some work? From his side, he feels that he's a bit outdated in the IT sector because in 2016 he finished his B.Tech, and now when he goes back into the job market, there'll be a lot of freshers, a lot of people who have been current on the subject, and he may miss out, because he's just a pure B.Tech computer science, he may miss out on any good jobs because he may not be able to compete with them. Is this a correct thing? So my question I repeat, sir. Should he continue for the government job, or should he try for any job in the IT sector? Thank you.
Oh, I don't think he should try for a government job at all. I don't think he should try for a government job at all. I think that what's happening in India is not once in a decade or once in a millennium. It's really once in the lifetime of a country. And I'm obviously biased here. I'm running a company which is growing at 25%. You know, we've hired somebody every 5 minutes for the last 15 years. But we have only hired 5% of the kids who came to us for a job. You have to process the math. 90,000 kids come to me for a job every month, and I only hire 5,000 of them. Unemployability is clearly a bigger problem than unemployment, because I have 25,000 jobs every day that I cannot fill. So it's important for us to sort of recognize that your son's sort of decision to chase UPSC may have driven by your long shadow. You worked for the government, and that's what he's seen it. And that was true for me too. My parents were civil servants, and I would submit one of the biggest advantages of civil service parents is that you realize early in life that you don't live in an economy, you live in a society, right? And frugality is another important one. But one of the biggest wounds of a civil service upbringing is risk aversion. My father was horrified when I told him I'd take a loan and go to Wharton. He was horrified when I said I wouldn't take a job after Wharton and start my own company. I think he's okay now. But he still thinks that, the distrust of the private sector still exists massively, right? And I think that is earned partly by India's private sector, right? So the government has an execution deficit, the private sector has a trust deficit, and non-for-profits have a scale deficit. All three of us have some birth defect or the other, right? So it's clear that we're struggling with our birth defects. But I think that in the next 20 years, the trust deficit of the private sector is already being overcome. I'm not sure about the execution deficit of the government yet, but it's getting better. But I think there will have to be a massive dose of sort of civil service reform before the execution deficit of the government sorts out. So I would say for your son, I don't think he's outdated at all in 2 years of being out of an engineering college. I think he can easily brush up. MOOCs are a very real option. Online learning is a very real option. Apprenticeships are now opening up as a very real option. The Apprenticeship Act was amended. India only has 3 lakh apprentices. Germany has 3 million, Japan has 10 million, China has 20 million, and I think India will have 10, 15 million apprentices over the next 5, 10 years. So I think there are a variety of options, IT and non-IT, available to him, and he should get 3, 4 years of work experience or 5 years and then go for a business school. I have 5 years of work experience between my BCom and my MBA. My wife has 7 years of work experience. I went to Sri Ram College in Delhi. And unfortunately, all my smart batchmates went straight to business school at IIM, but I chose to work for 5 years. And I think all of them would agree that in retrospect, my path was better, because an MBA is not an academic degree, it's a professional degree. So he should work for 4 or 5 years, get an MBA, and then ride the next 20 years of 8% GDP growth. In my mind, I mean, that's
I think
my name is Preeta. We are in the skills business, a baby. You are a giant. Thank you for a very engaging discussion, and I've been kind of listening to you and hearing your, your concepts and theories. One of the things that you also earlier at an Indian Express article talked about is achhi naukri. People are not looking for just a job, achhi naukri. Yeah. And something that you alluded to right now. Now, how do I get Chotu and Raju's, and how do I get this 90% at least people, at least 70% in your company or any company, to get these people to, get the productivity sense in them, which means on the supply side. I understand that the companies will give a wage premium only if the productivity,
is there.
This thing is there. But what do I do to get the youth or the person who's looking into the job market to become, demand that I must get that skill?
So are you saying they're less ambitious or not as hungry?
They are very ambitious, but since you are rejecting. You are selecting only 5% because you don't find them up to the mark. Yeah, Raju and Chotu who lost their jobs.
But my levels of rejection could be last mile, which is shave, take a bath, tuck your shirt in and look at me in the eye, which is 10%. Another 10% could be because of English. English is like Windows, it's an operating system, it's not a language. The wage premium for English is, your labor mobility is higher.
Correct.
So I have multiple buckets of rejection, right?
I agree. How do I get the youth to demand or aspire for this, which is the missing link between them getting a legitimate fair wage from the demand side? Yeah. That's one. And two is, I know that the companies that are not following the labor laws, etc., they are a bigger problem. How do I get a non-punitive way to get them to follow labor laws? I know the punitive thing is not working. We work in the skill space, and I know it's a problem to get people youth jobs where they are going to get Provident Fund and ESIC and whatever. Is there a solution you have which is non-punitive? And so if you pay or if you hire people with and give them real wages, you get a reward. So basically two things.
Well, the second one is above your pay grade. and mine, right? The second one of formalization of India, but I would submit, people miss small things. The universal enterprise number, which was announced in the recent budget, all of us have 27 different numbers as a company. I have 20. Now we are moving to a universal enterprise number, which will make informality even more difficult. Because if you're paying EDLI, why aren't you paying ESI? If you're paying ESI, why aren't you paying GST? And so I would submit that the informality of that grass grows at night while we sleep. I think the formalization of India, if it sustains the current tempo for another 1 year, in another 5-10 years, the cost of it will become too difficult to be informal. So that we shouldn't worry about. That'll happen while we're doing. How do we get kids? So this is an interesting question of, are you saying that they are culturally not aware or they don't have role models? Because
I think it's not more of an entitlement. I'm not settling for a job that anything in a plan of. How do I get?
But how do they afford to be unemployed?
It's the underemployment.
But how? So they're staying at home,
or not doing, or at least getting by. You get that much. I mean, everybody has a smartphone today. So, ऐसी बात भी नहीं है that I'm not getting, 2
So
square
if you
meals.
have a smartphone and you have food, then what are you talking about? Happiness? Well, nobody can guarantee happiness. I know rich people who are miserable and poor people who are very happy.
It's the difference
it's hard for me. It's sort of like what he says. Now, 100 million people, informal sector, demonetization ne jaan khali unki. I mean, kahan hai 100 million people? Yeah? So so I would be careful with this definition. I would submit you are struggling between the definition of a living wage and a minimum wage, and something higher than a living wage. See, a minimum wage is an arithmetical concept. A living wage is a philosophical concept. His definition of living wage is different from my definition of living wage. My son's definition of living wage is different from mine because he chose his father wisely. So I think that this whole notion of living wage and minimum wage and aspiration wage is something we should not use interchangeably. For years, the only thing the 3E system, education, employment, and employability, should solve is a living wage. We must give everybody to be able to afford shelter, food, clothes, and stuff like that. The difference between need, wants, and desires, which is what India is sort of struggling with, people are sort of confusing desires with needs, and every generation probably does. But I would be careful with your notion of this generation is lazier than the earlier generation, or this generation is more entitled. At the Parthenon 200 BC, it is written there that this next generation is lazy and will destroy the world. So every generation has called the next generation lazy, right? And so I would be careful with that. I think there are a lot of kids who are much more ambitious than we are. I would be, a lot of people, there's a great book by Snigdha Poonam called Dreamers. You should read it, where she's sort of chronicled the out of control aspirations of small town India. And I think she's worried about what will happen to India if those aspirations are not met. And he said, people will come on the street. I think that is the energy which will change India. I think, I memorized Pandit Nehru's Tryst with Destiny speech when I was a child, but we missed that Tryst with Destiny. There are 300 million people in India who will never read the newspaper that they deliver, or sit in the car that they clean, or send their kids to the school that they help build. But this isn't a problem like cancer or climate change. This is a plumbing problem. If we do formalization, financialization, urbanization, industrialization, and human capital, we can reach an $8,000 per capita income, which is what China is today. Can we reach US's 40, England's 30, Singapore's 55? We'll think about it, but let's get to 8,000 and put poverty of hunger and shelter in the museum that it should be.
Good evening, Mr. Sabharwal. It's a really entertaining and
hopefully more than entertaining.
explanatory session. I have a question. That is, many of the economies which have become service economies have gone through that manufacturing economy base. But probably India is one of the exceptions where it has peaked the service economy without being a manufacturing economy. Now my question is whether it makes sense for India to reinvent the wheel and go back to or focus on manufacturing. That is one. And secondly, as we are seeing a lot of service-based jobs are being taken over by technology. So when we have so much of jobs based on service, how is technology going to affect the future of service economy? I mean, where do you see India to be in coming days?
Yeah.
A world of driverless cars.
Yes, driverless cars, or could be anything else. But I'm not sure anybody can predict the future. The future is unknowable. I have studied 50 reports of countries all over the world, US in 1990, UK in 25, Japan in 2020. They all have the efficacy of palm reading or astrology. Nobody can predict the future. 50% of the jobs which were born in the US in every decade, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, did not exist in the decade before that. So I would submit, be very careful with people who predict with mathematical precision where jobs will be 5, 10, 15 years from now. They are delusional, and you must be very careful of them. We don't need to predict the future to be successful. We need to be self-healing as an economy. How do you become self-healing as an economy? You have many apprenticeships. You have a school system which focuses on strong foundations rather than making them electricians in class 8. You have labor laws which have 4 or 5 non-negotiables, minimum wage benefits, leave and safety, and everything else is not important. You have a college system which is connected to the school system. You have a skill system which is connected to the college system. So I would submit, this notion of whether it's manufacturing or services is unpredictable and unknowable. So let's just focus on making our supply side, our demand side, and how land, labor, capital combine. Economists call it total factor productivity. But there's a lot of regulatory cholesterol in land. There's a lot of regulatory cholesterol in labor. We have brought down our regulatory cholesterol in capital, but there's still a lot of regulatory cholesterol. And how these three combine. How can a first-generation entrepreneur like me, my life not be made miserable? I had almost 180 inspections in the first year of TeamLease. Now I'm a large company. I have 110 guys in regulatory affairs whose full-time job is handling the regulatory cholesterol. But small companies cannot handle that. So I would submit, let the Indian state make paperless, presence-less, cashless. I would say if all interactions, the India stack, which has now been adopted in financial services, is adopted by the government in paperless, presence-less, cashless, then for small entrepreneurs, you make life easy, you make it viable. I have no problem with small entrepreneurs. I have a problem with informality. And I just have a problem with informality because it has allowed the wage premium in India to be suppressed. And we are a labor surplus economy. I think Indians can be productive. Indians are as good as everybody else, right? Between 1820 and 1950, India grew at 0.1% per year. Between 1950 and 1991, India grew at 2% a year. And there was some idiot economist who called it the Hindu rate of growth. But from 1991 till now, we've grown at 7%. We didn't shoot all the Hindus. That was the wrong explanation. There's nothing culturally wrong with us Indians. It's just our plumbing was wrong. There was too much regulatory cholesterol. We didn't have infrastructure. Our productivity was killed on a daily basis. I am being, my parents retired to Kanpur. The 4 fastest growing industries in Kanpur are private bottled water, private security, private generators, and private schools. There is no state in Uttar Pradesh, right? Why are poor people being forced to buy water and electricity? Entrepreneurs can't substitute for the state. We can't be expected to substitute for the state. In fact, all of us in the private sector who said that, the government, a good government is a small government, I disagree with that. The government should do less so that it can do more. The private sector cannot do primary education. The private sector cannot do primary health care. The private sector can do very little in infrastructure unless the enabling environment is there. So I would submit for us, we don't have to choose between services and manufacturing. I don't think we have to worry about automation because right now we are so far away from the productivity frontier. To get from our current $1,500 per capita to the 8,000 which China is, automation is not a binding constraint. Who knows what will happen in 20 years? Maybe 20 is the new 30.
So sir, recently in one of the economic summit took place in New Delhi, and there the co-founder of Apple, Steve Wozniacki, had come and he commented that Indian people are not creative. Being a creative Indian, how much reality is there in this fact that Indian people are not creative, they are just rote learner and they are just good at preserving something. Just give them something and they will preserve it. So how much reality is there in this fact that Indian people are not creative?
See, I was at a conference where there were about 10 US principals and there were 10 Indian principals. At the end of the conference, American schools wanted to be Indian schools and Indian schools wanted to be American schools. American schools were envying our rigor, our hard work, and our testing, and Indian schools were envying the open-ended bullshitting of American schools or the creativity or whatever you want to call it. You know, there is an element of eat your vegetables in education, which some of the Western systems have lost. There is an element of teamwork, communication, project work, research, which some of the Indian systems have lost. The answer is somewhere in between. I would submit that, you know, one of my favorite quotes is an American politician called Mario Cuomo. He says, "We politicians campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose." It's true for entrepreneurs. We write our business plans in poetry, but we execute them in prose. And it's about the balance of poetry and prose. Too much prose and no poetry, you do nothing great. Too much poetry and no prose, you do nothing. So I would say this is a false sort of trade-off between creativity and rigor in Indian education systems. There are many people in India, I mean, Indians are 1% of the US population, right? Now. And they probably generate more GDP than maybe 80% of Indians. Why are Indians productive in America? Yes, obviously some of the smart Indians went to America, but I would submit it is the entrepreneurial ecosystem, the institutions, the infrastructure, which we did not fix. We told ourselves the wrong story. See, India told itself a brilliant political story after 1947. That universal franchise can be given in countries which are large and religiously diverse. You know, I was born and brought up in Kashmir, and India and Pakistan born on the same night have had different destinies because 3 million people in India win an election. But we told ourselves nutty economic stories after the 1955 Avadi resolution or the second 5-year plan in 1956, which sort of kneecapped capital markets, we kneecapped entrepreneurs, the license Raj killed creativity, we neglected primary education. And so our political stories, which were ahead of time, paid off. Our economic stories held us back, and I think it's time for us to review those economic stories. That began in 1991, and I think it's accelerating now. So, you know, it's not clear to me. You know, Samuel Huntington is a Harvard historian. To paraphrase him, he used to say, you know, the gap between India's reality and its aspiration is not a lie, it is a disappointment. And I completely agree with that. It's not a lie. Our aspirations must be high and have always been high. And now we just have to sort of recognize that disappointment was not anything cultural. It's not that Indians aren't creative. It's not that Indians like corruption. It's not that Indians like informality. There was a plumbing problem which we now are fixing.
I think I can take 2 questions now. That lady and this gentleman. And I'm sorry because we are running out of... Yes, ma'am.
Hello, good evening, Mr. Sabharwal. It has been a wonderful session, but I am more happy because we both share the same college, SRCC. May I know?
Did you learn anything there?
Sorry, sir?
Did you learn anything there?
Of course. It has been an esteemed institution.
Yeah.
Okay, my question is, like we see that our youth are preferring and rushing. So youth are running and rushing to foreign lands in search of jobs these days. Doesn't it mean they feel like they are getting better job opportunities, there are better working conditions, there are better salary packages and also incentives. So don't you think so, like we Indians are unable to provide them sufficient jobs according to their caliber? As you only said, like if somebody wants to work for 5,000 rupees, then there are lots of jobs. But he demands for 10,000, 15,000 rupees, then only problem arises. And don't you think so, like our quota system in schools and colleges, they are the main responsible things for this. Because the students who are not getting admission in according to their caliber, they have to rush here or there. And then they will settle down for the in foreign countries for the job. Because they will be getting better salaries according to their caliber in the foreign lands as compared to India. Please.
Well,
reservations. I think she's raised an issue.
Reservations, yeah, quota. I'm talking about the quota system also. I think so. That is only.
Yeah, but that's not why Indians are leaving India. And I would submit, be careful with extrapolating the past, right? Because between 1969 and 1974, 80% of the IIT Delhi batch left India. This year, 80% of them stayed back. So that is your biggest marker of what will happen in the next 20 years. No, that may have to do with an antibiotic reaction to Trump and jobs and visas, but it's also got to do with the fact that India is a very exciting place to be an entrepreneur today. If you were going...
But still, I think so, youth are really preferring. Because that has become a great craze for them. Because in every aspect, they feel like better, the other countries are better. They are paying them better and everything is better there.
Yes, the per capita income of a country in Singapore is $55,000, US is 45, UK is 33. Our per capita income is $1,500. So of course, they will pay them better. My submission is that if there is anything we are learning in the last 10 years, it is that you don't have to be Western to be modern. I think India will learn to be modern without... I grew up believing we had to be Western to be modern. I think most people in the 70s, 80s, because our self-esteem was low in India, believed we had to be Western to be modern. I don't think the young kids today believe you have to be Western to be modern. I think that is the biggest gift they have over our generation. And I would submit that if you are planning to spend the next 20 years of your life, if there was a country you would move to as an entrepreneur, it would be India. There are millions of companies going to be created in the next 20 years which don't exist today. And they will all be profitable, they will be good for India, and they will be fun. You know, entrepreneurs look for companies which are fun, profitable, and good. And I think it's hard to find that combination. In India, you can find millions of entrepreneurial opportunities.
That is only for the future times, right? How to deal with the present problem? Like what to do about the reservation and the quota system?
I mean, it's above my pay grade. I play with the hand I have been dealt. I'm not trying to be right, I'm trying to be successful.
Okay, thank you.
I am an entrepreneur. I focus on, I think that there is, fairness questions are difficult questions. I am much more humble about judging history than I used to be.
The last question. Yeah.
Thank you for a wonderful set of ideas, Jion. Very quick. What is the single biggest policy measure that the government needs to do for the kind of vision that you're suggesting, and for skill development, and the whole 5 sets of things you said: urbanization, industrialization, financialization, and so on. And second, slightly intrigued by your comment, you said that the jobs in service sector are being created only in sales and retail. I mean, what about the health sector? What about education? What about the entertainment industry? And so, what about even IT services? So, I just want to...
But I actually didn't say sales and retail. I said sales, customer service, and logistics across all industries. So, it's actually FMCG sales. It could be, I have 5,000 people selling seeds. I have 5,000 people selling water filters. I have 10,000 people selling financial services. So, I would say sales across domestic consumption. Sales, customer service, and logistics. Ricardo Hausman is a professor at the Harvard Kennedy School. He says the best predictor of sustained economic success is economic complexity. India is very economically complex. We make everything and do everything. We don't always do it well. We don't always do it at scale. But that economic complexity is really what is manifesting itself in sales, customer service, and logistics. And that's our best bet for the sort of next 10, 20 years. What do we do? I think if we stay on this path of formalizing, where we enforce laws and we make it hard to be sort of informal, I think if we get manufacturing employment up to 20%, which needs lower regulatory cholesterol and infrastructure. I think if we improve human capital, which is Right to Education Act becomes the Right to Learning Act, and we vocationalize higher education. You know, we have a university in Gujarat, it's India's first skill university. We applied in 2007 to India's higher education regulator, and he says, Mr. Sabharwal, you're very confused about your vocational university. A university cannot be vocational. I said, you idiot, that's exactly why I'm applying. But anyway, they still didn't clear it. But we set it up in Gujarat in 2013 because Gujarat passed a special bill in their assembly allowing us to function. And what is TeamLease Skills University? It's different from a normal university in 3 ways. We pray to one God, which is employers. Only 5% of our kids are on campus. The balance are doing an apprenticeship or distance education. And only 5% are doing a degree. But 100% have the ability to take a 3-month certificate as an opening balance for a 1-year diploma, as an opening balance for a 2-year associate degree, as an opening balance for a 3-year degree. So the vocationalization of higher education is a very important part of India's supply side sort of response. And obviously fixing government schools. I know a lot of people think we should give up on government schools. I don't think we should give up on government schools. Today, government schools don't have the fear of falling and the hope of rising. There is no performance management for teachers and principals. In fact, we have lost the last 20 years thinking fixing government schools is about teacher qualifications, teacher salaries, and small class sizes. Turns out those 3 actually don't move the needle on government schools. So I would say there is no one thing that India needs to do. We need to do a lot of things in these 4 buckets of formalization, financialization, internationalization. And I think, you know, at this point in India's sort of history, I really believe that it is our turn. I think it is our turn, it is our time. And if you were young, this is the country you would move to. I think in the next 20 years. And why are we having so many problems in government? In public sector banks, in income tax, in CBI not being able to convince the 2G scam. I mean, because the scale and complexity of India is going up disproportionately. You know, total bank deposits in India when banks were nationalized were 1,500 crores. It's 100 lakh crores right now. In fact, we added more bank deposits last year than the total bank deposits in 1997. So India, it's not about more cooks in the kitchen, it's about a different recipe. And that's always hard. Every society goes through that. When more cooks in the kitchen, throwing more money at the problem is not good enough. You need a different recipe. And I think that's what we're in the process of sort of doing. So I'm actually, you know, when people ask me, when are you going to get to 1 million employees? What is your strategy? I said, you know, in India, you only need one strategy, right? And I have, you know, I have a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon in my office, where Calvin says the secret to success is being in the right place at the right time. Since you never know the right time, you find the right place and hang out, and he goes to sleep there. This is the right place of right time, aayega jab aayega, you know. That's essentially what we're doing in TeamLease, right? We have India's fastest growing university, we have India's fastest growing apprenticeship program, we are one of India's largest employers, we're among the largest payers of PF. But I am a baby in diapers compared to what the potential of India will be in 20 years. And I can think of many other sort of entrepreneurs like me, first generation entrepreneurs who raised private equity, had no money of our own, took our companies public, and these companies will, we no longer need to fear multinationals. You know, I always used to fight with my mother when she used to identify somebody, ye multinational ke liye kaam karta hai. What does that mean? White people are better than Indian entrepreneurs? I don't think she says that anymore, because there's so many examples of Indian entrepreneurs who are building India, and that's what it always should have been. I think it will be.
Great, Manish. I know you were a good writer, but I never knew that you were a good speaker. I mean, you spoke like a guru.
They're not mutually exclusive.
Pleasure having
Thank you.
There is a token of from our